John had always been a quiet man who preferred the simple things in life. After spending years stuck in the chaos of city living, endless traffic, loud neighbors, and cramped apartments, he finally decided it was time for a change. He saved up enough money to buy a small house on the edge of town, surrounded by open fields and fresh air. It wasn't fancy or extravagant, but it was exactly what he needed, a place where he could breathe easy and escape the constant noise of urban life. The house itself was charming, though a bit rundown when John first moved in. The previous owner hadn't done much to maintain it, so the yard was overgrown with weeds, the paint on the walls was peeling, and the gutters sagged under years of neglect. But none of that bothered John. In fact, he saw it as an opportunity, a blank canvas waiting for his touch. For someone like him, who found peace in working with his hands, fixing up the house felt less like a chore and more like therapy. Every weekend, John would roll up his sleeves and get to work. He started with the basics, mowing the lawn, pulling out stubborn weeds, and trimming back the wild hedges that lined the front yard. Slowly but surely, his hard work began to transform the property. Dead patches of grass turned green again, flower beds sprouted vibrant colors, and the once jagged hedges took on neat, rounded shapes. Neighbors passing by couldn't help but notice the difference. Some even stopped to compliment him on how lovely the place looked now. At first, John thought he'd hit the jackpot with his new neighborhood. Most of the people around him seemed friendly enough. They waved hello when they passed each other on the street and occasionally brought over homemade cookies or pies just to welcome him to the community. It all felt warm and welcoming until he met Karen. Karen lived 2 doors down and served as the unofficial leader of the Homeowners Association, HOA. She was the kind of person who thrived on control, always making sure everyone followed the rules, no matter how trivial they might seem. From the moment John arrived, she made it clear she had opinions about everything, from the color of his mailbox to the type of flowers he planted in his garden. At first, her critiques came in the form of polite notes left on his doorstep, pointing out minor infractions like "your shrubs are slightly taller than regulation height," or "please ensure your trash bins aren't visible from the curb." But as weeks went by, those notes became more frequent and more critical. John tried not to let it bother him. After all, he figured Karen probably meant well. Maybe she just wanted the neighborhood to look nice. Still, there was something about her tone that rubbed him the wrong way. Her words weren't outright rude, but they carried an air of superiority, as if she believed she knew better than anyone else how things should be done. Despite Karen's constant interference, John kept focusing on his goal, creating a space that felt like home. He poured his heart into every detail, determined to make his little corner of the world as beautiful as possible. Little did he know, this dedication would soon put him at odds with Karen in ways he never expected. What started as harmless nitpicking would escalate into something far more personal and destructive. It was a crisp Saturday morning when John first noticed something was wrong. He had spent the previous afternoon carefully shaping his hedges into perfect curves, stepping back every so often to admire his handiwork. The sight of them filled him with pride. They were symmetrical, lush, and exactly what he'd envisioned for his front yard. But as he stepped outside that morning, coffee mug in hand, he froze. His heart sank as he took in the scene before him. The once pristine hedge was a mess. Branches lay scattered across the lawn, snapped clean off at odd angles. Leaves were torn and crumpled, littering the ground like confetti after a storm. Someone, or something, had deliberately destroyed it. At first, John thought it might have been an accident. Maybe kids playing nearby got carried away, or perhaps stray animals had clawed at the bushes during the night. Whatever the cause, it left him feeling frustrated but not overly alarmed. After all, accidents happened. Determined to fix the damage, John grabbed his gardening tools and set to work. He trimmed away the broken branches, swept up the debris, and reshaped the hedge as best he could. By the end of the day, It looked almost as good as it had before. Still, the incident lingered in the back of his mind. Who would do such a thing? And why target his hedge specifically? A few days later, it happened again. This time, the destruction was worse. Entire sections of the hedge were flattened, as if someone had taken a knife to them. John felt anger bubbling inside him now. It wasn't just carelessness, it was deliberate vandalism. He decided to keep a closer eye on things, hoping to catch whoever was responsible. That's when he installed a small security camera near his front door, discreet enough that no one would notice unless they were looking for it. The footage from the camera confirmed his worst suspicions. Late one night, under the dim glow of the streetlights, Karen appeared on screen. She wore her signature oversized sunglasses, even though it was pitch dark, and carried a pair of garden shears in her hand. Without hesitation, she marched straight up to John's hedge and began hacking away at it. Her movements were quick and forceful, as if she were punishing the plant for some imagined offense. When she finished, she glanced around furtively, then slipped back toward her house, disappearing into the shadows. John sat staring at the video clip, disbelief washing over him. Karen, of all people, Karen was behind this. Sure, she had criticized his landscaping choices before, but he never imagined she'd take things this far. It wasn't just about enforcing HOA rules anymore. This was personal. She wasn't just nitpicking, she was actively trying to ruin something he cared deeply about. As the reality sank in, John felt a mix of emotions: anger, frustration, and even sadness. He had worked so hard to make his home beautiful, only to have someone tear it apart out of spite. What made it worse was knowing that Karen wouldn't stop here. If anything, she'd likely come back for more, convinced that she was somehow justified in her actions. For the first time since moving into the neighborhood, John felt truly powerless. How could he possibly deal with someone like her? John knew he couldn't just sit back and let Karen continue destroying his hard work. He replayed the security footage in his mind, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. The logical step seemed clear: talk to her directly. Maybe she didn't realize how much effort he put into maintaining his yard. Perhaps if he explained things calmly, she'd see reason and stop. The next day, John spotted Karen heading toward her car. Taking a deep breath, he walked over with a polite smile. "Hey Karen," he said, keeping his tone friendly. "Do you have a minute? I wanted to chat about something." Karen turned to face him, adjusting her sunglasses even though they were standing in her driveway under an overcast sky. "What is it?" she asked, her voice clipped and impatient. "Well," John began, "I've noticed some issues with my hedge lately. Someone's been cutting it up at night, and I think it might be a misunderstanding. I know you're really passionate about keeping the neighborhood looking nice, but I've been working really hard on my yard. It means a lot to me, and I was hoping we could find a way to work together instead of damaging it." For a moment, Karen just stared at him, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then, without missing a beat, she replied, "John, I'm only doing what's best for the community. Your hedge is too tall. It blocks visibility for drivers pulling out of their driveways. It's a safety hazard, plain and simple. If you can't follow the HOA guidelines, then maybe you shouldn't live here." Her words hit like a punch to the gut. John had expected resistance, but not outright hostility. He tried again, his voice firmer this time. "Karen, I understand your concerns, but isn't there a better way to handle this? Instead of tearing it apart yourself, why not bring it up officially through the HOA? We can discuss solutions that work for everyone." Karen crossed her arms, her expression smug. "Oh, trust me, I already have. And the board agrees with me. You'll hear from them soon enough." With that, she climbed into her car, leaving John standing there, stunned and speechless. Determined not to give up, John attended the next HOA meeting. He brought printed copies of the security footage showing Karen vandalizing his hedge, along with photos of the damage. As he presented his case, He kept his tone respectful, appealing to the board's sense of fairness. "I'm not asking for special treatment," he said. "All I want is for us to resolve this peacefully. Isn't that what the HOA is supposed to do? Help neighbors work things out?" But instead of siding with him, the board members exchanged uneasy glances before delivering their verdict. One of them cleared his throat and said, "John, while we appreciate your concern, the rules are clear. Hedges must meet specific height requirements, and unfortunately, yours doesn't comply. We suggest you trim it down immediately." Karen sat across the room, a satisfied smirk playing on her lips as the decision unfolded. John felt a wave of frustration wash over him. How could they take her side when the evidence was right in front of them? But arguing further wouldn't help. He could see that now. The HOA wasn't going to budge, and Karen had effectively manipulated the system to suit her agenda. Walking home that evening, John realized diplomacy wasn't going to solve this problem. Karen wasn't interested in compromise. She thrived on control. And as long as she held sway over the HOA, he'd always be fighting an uphill battle. Something inside him shifted. Anger simmered beneath the surface, mingled with determination. If Karen refused to play fair, then maybe it was time for him to change the game entirely. John spent the next few days replaying the HOA meeting in his head. The board's refusal to take action against Karen left him feeling cornered, as if he were trapped in a game where the rules were rigged against him. But John wasn't the type to give up easily. He had always been a problem solver, someone who could think outside the box when things got tough. And now, with no other options on the table, his mind began to wander toward unconventional solutions. At first, the idea seemed ridiculous, almost childish. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. Karen clearly valued her possessions above all else, especially her gleaming white luxury SUV. It was the one thing she took care of meticulously, washing and waxing it every weekend like it was a prized trophy. John knew that if there was anything guaranteed to get under her skin, it would involve her precious car. The thought of hitting her where it hurt most gave him a strange sense of satisfaction. He started brainstorming ways to retaliate without causing permanent damage. After all, he didn't want to escalate things too far or risk legal trouble. His gaze fell on an old can of sticky, paint-like goo he bought years ago for a DIY project, but never used. It was thick, messy, and nearly impossible to clean off once it dried. A perfect nuisance weapon. An idea began to form in his mind. What if he could rig a trap along his driveway that would spray the goo onto anything passing by? The plan came together quickly. Using materials from his garage, John built a simple mechanism hidden among the bushes near his driveway. He connected a small pressure plate to a hose nozzle, positioning it so that anyone driving past at night would trigger the trap. The goo would splatter across their vehicle, leaving behind a sticky mess that would take hours, if not days, to scrub off. It wasn't malicious enough to cause real harm, but it was annoying enough to send a clear message. As he worked on the trap, John couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nervousness. Part of him worried about crossing a line, but another part felt justified. Karen had crossed boundaries repeatedly, showing no regard for his property or feelings. If she wanted to play dirty, then fine. He'd show her exactly how frustrating it could be to deal with someone who refused to back down. Once the trap was ready, John tested it a few times to make sure it worked properly. Satisfied with the results, he set it up and waited. Each night, he monitored the security footage, watching for any sign of Karen making another late-night visit to his hedge. He told himself this wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting what mattered to him. Still, deep down, he knew the truth. This was personal now. Karen had pushed him too far, and he was done being the nice guy. The anticipation gnawed at him as the days passed. Would Karen fall for the trap, or would she somehow figure out what he'd done? Either way, John was prepared. For the first time since moving into the neighborhood, he felt like he was finally taking control of the situation. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: Karen wouldn't see it coming. The night Karen fell into John's trap was one he would remember for a long time. He had been keeping a close eye on the security footage, half expecting her to show up sooner or later. Sure enough, just after midnight, there she was, slinking down the street in her usual oversized sunglasses, garden shears in hand. She moved with purpose, clearly intending to do more damage to his hedge. But this time, John wasn't going to let her get away with it. As Karen approached his driveway, John held his breath, watching the screen intently. The moment her car rolled past the hidden mechanism, there was a soft asterisk whoosh asterisk sound. A spray of goo shot out from the bushes, splattering across the side of her pristine white SUV. John couldn't help but grin as he saw the instant reaction. Karen slammed on the brakes, her headlights illuminating the sticky mess covering her car. She stepped out, looking both horrified and furious, her jaw dropping as she ran her fingers over the gooey residue. "What the?" she muttered under her breath, her voice sharp with disbelief. For once, her usual air of superiority faltered. She spun around, scanning the darkened driveway and yard, as if searching for someone to blame. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously, but there was no one in sight. Satisfied that she wouldn't find him lurking nearby, John leaned back in his chair, savoring the moment. This was exactly what she deserved, a taste of her own medicine. Seething with anger, Karen stormed toward John's front door, pounding on it with such force that it rattled in its frame. Startled by the sudden noise, John quickly composed himself before opening the door. "Karen," he asked innocently, pretending to be confused. "What's wrong?" "My car," she snapped, pointing wildly at the driveway. "Something sprayed some disgusting goo all over it. Did you see anything? Hear anything?" John shook his head, feigning concern. "Oh no, that's awful. Are you sure it happened here? Maybe it was farther down the road. I haven't heard or seen anything unusual tonight." Karen glared at him, clearly unconvinced. "Don't play dumb with me, John. You're the only one who lives here. Who else could have done this?" "I honestly don't know," John replied calmly, holding her gaze without flinching. "But if I were you, I'd check the neighborhood cameras. Someone might have caught something." Karen opened her mouth to argue further, but nothing came out. Instead, she turned on her heel and marched back to her car, muttering angrily under her breath. Watching her struggle to wipe away the goo with her bare hands brought John a strange sense of satisfaction. It wasn't permanent damage. It would wash off eventually, but cleaning it up would be a tedious, frustrating process. And judging by the look on her face, Karen was already regretting her late-night escapade. Later that night, as John reviewed the footage again, he couldn't help but chuckle quietly to himself. The plan had worked perfectly. Karen had gotten exactly what she deserved, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of relief. Of course, he knew this wasn't the end of things. Karen wasn't the type to let something like this go easily. She'd likely try to retaliate in some way, maybe even double down on her complaints to the HOA. But for now, he didn't care. Tonight, he had won. And as he climbed into bed, exhausted but triumphant, John realized something important. Standing up to Karen, even in such an unconventional way, had given him a newfound confidence. Whatever came next, he was ready. The next morning, news of Karen's misfortune spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. It started with a few curious neighbors spotting her white SUV coated in sticky green goo as she tried, and failed, to scrub it off in her driveway. Word traveled fast, and soon enough, people were talking about it over coffee, during walks, and even at the local grocery store. Some laughed quietly behind closed doors, while others exchanged knowing glances, fully aware of Karen's reputation for meddling in everyone's business. Karen, however, wasn't laughing. If anything, she seemed more determined than ever to pin the blame on John. She marched into the HOA office bright and early, filing multiple complaints against him. According to her, he had deliberately sabotaged her property out of spite. He set a trap, she exclaimed dramatically to anyone who would listen. This is malicious harassment, and I won't stand for it. But despite her theatrics, Karen quickly realized she was fighting an uphill battle. The HOA board, already growing weary of her constant nitpicking and self-righteous attitude, struggled to take her accusations seriously. Without concrete evidence tying John to the incident, all they could do was issue him a vague warning about maintaining neighborly conduct. Even then, their tone suggested they didn't believe Karen's claims entirely. Meanwhile, Karen's public meltdown only made things worse for her. A neighbor, who had secretly grown tired of her bullying behavior, snapped a photo of her goo-covered car and posted it online. They captioned it with a witty comment, "When you care more about rules than people." Within hours, the image ended up on Reddit's r/entitled People subreddit, where users gleefully tore into Karen's antics. Comments poured in, mocking her obsession with Hedges, her vanity over her expensive car, and her inability to coexist peacefully with others. "Classic Karen energy," one commenter wrote. "This is what happens when you think you're the queen of the neighborhood." Another added, "Honestly, good for whoever did this. Karma works wonders." As the post gained traction online, Karen's embarrassment reached new heights. Friends and acquaintances began treating her differently, some avoiding her altogether. Even members of the HOA board, who once indulged her demands, started questioning whether her behavior was doing more harm than good for the community. Her influence waned rapidly, replaced by whispers of disapproval and eye rolls whenever she spoke. For John, life became noticeably quieter. With Karen distracted by her damaged ego and dwindling social standing, her late-night visits to his hedge stopped completely. He continued tending to his yard without interference, finally able to enjoy the fruits of his labor. Though he felt a twinge of guilt for resorting to such measures, he couldn't deny the sense of relief that came with seeing Karen humbled. For the first time since moving in, he felt truly free from her relentless scrutiny. Still, John knew better than to gloat. He kept his interactions with Karen polite and neutral, never giving her ammunition to accuse him further. When she occasionally shot him icy glares or muttered under her breath, he simply smiled and went about his day. Inside, though, he couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction. Karma, it seemed, had finally caught up with her, and the neighborhood was better for it. With Karen's grip on the community loosening, other residents began stepping forward to voice their concerns. One family complained about her habit of reporting minor infractions, while another shared stories of her lecturing them about holiday decorations. Slowly but surely, the tide turned against her. What had once been a neighborhood ruled by fear now felt like a place where people could breathe easier. And that, John thought, was worth every bit of effort. Weeks turned into months, and the neighborhood began to feel like a different place altogether. Karen's once unshakable authority had crumbled, leaving her increasingly isolated. She still attended HOA meetings, but her presence no longer carried the same weight it once did. Other members openly challenged her opinions, rolling their eyes or cutting her off mid-sentence when she launched into one of her tirades about community standards. It was clear that her reign as the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood was over. For John, life finally settled into a peaceful rhythm. His hedge, now trimmed to regulation height out of sheer necessity, remained intact, untouched by vandals or overly zealous neighbors. The garden flourished under his care, with vibrant flowers blooming in neat rows and lush greenery framing the front yard. Every weekend, he spent hours outside tending to his plants, enjoying the quiet satisfaction of creating something beautiful without interference. Passers-by often stopped to compliment his work, and for the first time, John felt truly accepted by the community. Karen, on the other hand, seemed to retreat further into herself. Her pristine SUV, though cleaned of the goo, bore faint scratches from her frantic attempts to scrub it off. She drove it less frequently now, perhaps too embarrassed to face the judgmental stares of her neighbors. When she did venture out, she kept her head down, avoiding eye contact and sticking to short, clipped conversations. Gone was the smug confidence that had defined her. In its place was a palpable air of defeat. The HOA meetings became noticeably quieter, almost pleasant. Without Karen dominating every discussion, decisions were made more democratically, with input from all members rather than just her rigid interpretations of the rules. Neighbors started working together more, organizing block parties and cleanup days that brought everyone closer. The tension that had once hung heavy over the community dissipated, replaced by a sense of camaraderie and mutual respect. John couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed since he'd first moved in. What had started as a simple desire to create a welcoming home had turned into a battle against entitlement and control. While he regretted having to resort to such unconventional measures, he also knew it had been necessary. Karen's actions left him no choice but to stand up for himself, and in doing so, he inspired others to do the same. One evening, as John sat on his porch watching the sunset, a neighbor approached him with a warm smile. "Thanks for everything you've done," they said simply. "We've all been wanting to push back against Karen for years, but none of us had the guts. You showed us it's possible to take a stand." John nodded, feeling a swell of pride. He hadn't set out to be a hero, but if his actions had helped foster a kinder, more united neighborhood, then it had been worth it. As he waved goodbye to his neighbor and leaned back in his chair, he realized something important. Peace wasn't just about keeping your head down and avoiding conflict. Sometimes it meant standing up for what was right, even when it was hard. In the end, John's hedge stood tall and healthy, a symbol of resilience and determination. And while he hoped never to deal with another Karen again, he knew one thing for certain: he was ready for whatever came next.